Hey guys, and welcome to the PiG Daily, episode number 13. First thing you're probably noticing is my webcam is back to good quality. Woo! Turns out all you need to do if you've got a problem with a webcam that's disconnecting all your other USB devices is you uninstall the drivers and then you reinstall them and then you uninstall them and then you reinstall them and then you turn it off and on again. But hey, on the plus side, we've actually got a webcam that's working now, so yay! We're actually pretty damn happy with that. Yesterday, doing the show with the very old webcam was a little bit awkward, just kind of looking at myself on my second screen here, and basically just seeing a few kind of pixels arrayed, forming what is meant to be a face. But oh well, that happened. So thanks for hanging out, guys. Today we are going to be looking at defending all ins. Defending all ins is interesting because it's something which is an incredibly broad topic. It's a pretty big portion of StarCraft, but it's also an area which you often hear talk about how to defend a specific all-in. Like, people will be like, the 12 pool, hey? Well, if you spot the Zerglings leave their base at 1 minute 37, then you should know to stop your supply at 18, cut this here, defend with X, Y, Z. And, you know, people get very specific, and that's very helpful, especially when something's very popular in the meta. You kind of learn the specific response, right? That's great. But what we don't often talk about is just kind of generally dealing with aggression yourself, especially for newer players. So today, while not quite being necessarily a beginner basics episode, it is going to be an episode which is very useful to newer players, but it's also going to be something which should help players at all different skill levels, because what we're really addressing is how to figure out how to defend aggression, all-ins, cheese, how to figure out what we should have done better after we lose to it. And that's why what we're going to be doing today is looking through replays of all different skill levels. And we're talking about, you know, gold, silver replays. I believe most of the other ones are diamond replays. But there's quite a range of skills. There's a lot of mistakes that go on. There's a lot of not the most refined attacks that happen. Yet nonetheless, we're looking at, you know, these sort of attacks working and kind of what's going on in the game for the player to fall apart. So today the goal is really just try and find a formula for analyzing our own games after we lose and saying, what the hell can I do better? And giving us some structure to that rather than just saying, oh, well, dude, everyone knows versus Adept Immortal, you just stop at 42 drones, mass roaches off 3 gas and you're fine. What if you run into a slightly different type of Adept Immortal attack and you need to adapt in a different way? What we want to be talking about today is thinking and solving that problem on your own in a vacuum. If no one else knows about the build that you're having trouble with, you can just hop in the replay and analyze it and figure it out yourself, or at least that's the goal. So let's dive on into game. Let's not dilly-dally too long, and let's take a look. So this first game is kind of interesting because I want to first start off by fast-forwarding through this game. Now we're looking at it for Steven, our player up here. Actually, I believe it may have been submitted by our Zerg. I'm not 100% sure, but we're just going to fast forward through because both these guys are like, hey, I'm so tired. And this replay was submitted to me. You know, I asked viewers and people to submit to me replays of them dying to timing attacks, early timing attacks or cheese or any very fast aggression. And what we're going to see this game is a very good example of what I would call misconstruing cheese. Kind of giving a label to something that was very far from cheese and giving it that name. Now, of course, we can see some Hellions walking across the map. There's a proxy hatch going on down here. Super random. I love that proxy hatch location. It's more of a hidden base, actually, than a proxy hatch. But you can see, all right, you know, both players are droning up. This is gold, silver level. By the way, so obviously everything we're looking at is relative to the skill levels. The reason we don't want to be looking at necessarily exact timings is we do want to talk about all skill levels. We don't want to just say, well, a pro gamer should do this, because obviously that changes if you're not a pro gamer and you do things a little bit slower. But what happens this game is Zerg just builds up into, you know, a decent economy, some hidden drones on a third, makes a whole bunch of Roach Ravager with Roach speed, and +1. And then goes to have a poke. And the Zerg kind of comes across the map. Yeah, it looks like a decent amount of Roach Ravager. It's by no mean an all-in or like a cheese or anything there. And kills the couple of Hellions, the tank, and the Thor. And that's it. Why the heck? Okay. Pig, why the hell did we just watch that replay? The reason is because it was labeled cheese, and it wasn't, and I think this is something which bears talking about quickly. Generally, a lot of players like to blame stupid all-ins or cheese. There's this very negative connotation around all-ins and aggression. It's something we've been talking about a lot lately, about trying to embrace the strengths of aggression. That's not what we're talking about now, but what we are talking about is just making sure that you want to stay objective when you play StarCraft. If someone kills you with something and it's aggressive, it doesn't mean they're worse than you. It might mean that maybe they forced you into a position where you should have played a little bit better than they did, because it's an intense situation and defending in macro games is hard. However, you never want to be dismissive. You always want to stay objective and calm. Let's take a look in this game and let's see why this was not cheese. This is hitting at 7 minutes 30. Now, you might not have the best idea of game timer. Let's give you a rough idea. So I wrote a few things down here. So I was thinking, yeah, I don't really like to go off superset benchmarks because there's a lot of games which are very back and forth. But normally by this point, a pro gamer doing a macro build will have 3 bases pretty much fully saturated no matter what race they are. And they will be pumping out plenty of units. Actually, you know what? They'll have that from 6 minutes 30. They'll have their 3 bases saturated and so on. So I think it's fair to say that about a minute later in a relatively passive game, gold to silver players should be getting closer to there, especially if they're doing a 3-base build. Now in this case, we see quite a late third out of our Terran player. So he really wasn't doing a macro build. So I think it's very fair to say that a minute later and a base less than a pro gamer, we could have definitely had some more units out of this timing. Just generally, in a standard game, 6 minutes 30 onwards, we can say is a rough benchmark for when stuff can start to happen without it necessarily being an all-in. People can start to do things like, hey, I've got a couple Marines in a medevac with stim. I've got 2 medevacs with Marines with stim. I've got a bunch of Roaches and Ravagers and I'm going to have a poke around. A Terran player could run around with some mech as well. There's so many different things that can start to happen at this point in the game. And what we're going to start thinking about is, okay, well, if that's the case, what could we have done better to hold on here? Had stuff. In this particular game, all that's out as this is hitting us, let's go back just a few seconds further, is 5 Hellions, a tank, and 2 Marines. Simply put, there just weren't any things out for our Terran player this game. He just didn't have units. Now, I've jumped to that conclusion, but this is something I always want you to apply in your own games as well. And I've written up this whole list of things. I'll show it to you guys very quickly. I don't want to show it to you guys for too long and bore you with my notes. But this will all be in the Team Liquid thread afterwards, which will all be linked in the YouTube description if you're watching on YouTube. But let's let's take a look. So if we go up here, now this is the what can I change list. Basically, you talk about learning to recognize things coming, building units earlier, cutting workers earlier, changing your micro and positioning, and there's this whole list of points for each one of these we're going to talk about in detail a little bit later. However, remember in this game, it wasn't really that cheesy, wasn't something we needed to necessarily scout. It was just an attack which surprised us and we didn't have any units, and this really was the situation which we see in the last point, which is if all the above fails or there isn't really anything you can change above, look at adjusting our build to be safer. In this case, it's really about adjusting our build simply to work better, to have more stuff out at a very regular timing where pressures can come. So in this game, we look at it and we simply say, oh, okay, you know what? We just messed up our build. Yeah, we've got 4 factories, but we don't really have any units out of them. We're going for a very early double armory. We don't even have a wall, but we're doing mech. That's very greedy. There's just a couple of basic things to do with, okay, we clearly weren't producing out of our structures and so on. It's just kind of like, eh. And we can say, look, the build just wasn't good. At the start of the game, we're talking about how we were tired. Let's move on. So, indeed, let's do that. Luckily, we're all using current replays now, so there's not a billion times to hop in and out of games. Now, the reason we hopped into that replay first is I just wanted to make sure, first of all, we think about that idea of when you recognize when your build just totally misses the point in some way. And if you just don't have any units out and your economy is not that great and you don't even have a wall, it's 7 minutes, 38 minutes into the game, you've just made mistakes up to that point. No matter what your skill level, you should have some defense up by then. You should definitely have the ability to defend a basic poke like that. So in that scenario, we can't learn that much. Now let's hop into the next game, and this is where we start to look at good, actual, crazy pressure attacks. So this game is, I believe, a diamond game. I can't remember the exact league. It may have been platinum. And what we're seeing is this guy is sending 2 drones out incredibly early. He's got a 14 pool behind it, and he's going to be like, oh, I'm scouting. Oh, wait, no, I'm not scouting. Ha. And he throws the spine down just out of range. Comes in with a second drone. Builds a second spine. And Antoa over here is just like, oh, that's not cool, man. And Antoa has a pretty bad day, I can tell you that. No doubt not too happy after this one. Spine's bruised, bleeding, but not dead. Says, you noob, really noob, GG, you mum suck, die idiot, you sucker in macro. Bringing us back to that ever so important idea of why you're a much better person if you're simply very greedy and play no rush 20 at the start of the game. But if your opponent attacks you, remember, they're horrible, their mum really sucks, and and they should go die. Add expletive and Russian here. Alright, so let's talk about what we can do differently. Let's start applying this list in terms of what can we do that could make us figure out how to change things up in this scenario. Strong Song says it's diamond, this one. Okay, yeah, that's from, this was a diamond one. I wasn't looking at the logos when we loaded up the game. So right from very early on, let's look from the start. And the first thing you always want to do is look from the start in the replay and say, where did things start to go wrong? So if we put this on Antoa's vision, we can kind of see that, like, wait a second, we saw this first drone coming in. Our second overlord was on a good path to make sure we saw anything coming into our base. Look at this. We see the drone. So check this. Straight off the bat, we can say, we're following the first step, guys. Remember, the first step is learn to recognize it. We even saw the drone turn around. We definitely didn't see the drone leave the base. And there's telltale signs of just about every type of crazy attack out there. But one of the biggest ones for cannon rushes, one of the biggest ones for when you're dealing with proxy hatches or spine rushes, is if a worker goes missing. If a worker goes missing, it could be an SCV, it could be a probe, it could be a bunker going up inside your base, and then Reapers are hopping in, getting inside the bunker. Could be spine crawlers on the edge of your creep, could be cannons. Whenever you see a worker in your base, you always want to keep track of that worker. Very basic rule, something which you can so easily see by watching this replay. And you're like, oh man, I actually could have made a very basic adjustment to stop this. Yet as basic as it is, players will make these mistakes all the time. And the reason they do, and the reason they keep on doing it, is because they're too cocky and about calling their opponent an idiot who doesn't know how to macro, rather than just opening up the replay and being like, oh shit, I just need to change that. Commit that to memory. We're all good. That's all we needed to do. In this scenario, it's just like, really? Okay, so that's the first step. Learn to recognize it. Whenever a drone goes missing, we could deal with that. Now, how else would we deal with that? You just want to go through your own kind of figuring it out by experience. Now, if you're a brand new StarCraft player, you're a bronze player, you might be like, wow, what do I do if there's spines building there? Figure it out just through trial and error, through asking other players, through communicating. I'm going to talk about, of course, using my knowledge now, what I would do. I would just pull. I'd be like, oh, the drone went missing? And I would be aware of the risk that there's always a few black spots. It doesn't look like there's one there. There might be one there on the edge of your creep. And I would just immediately grab a drone. I'd be like, oh, that drone went missing. Let's like walk around. I'd be like, oh, there's a spine. And I would say, if I start attacking that with like 3 drones, the moment it starts building, it will die just as it finishes. So if it's already built a bit, I'll just grab like 5 drones, just click on that, and you move on to it. Should be fine. All right, cool. Another one comes in. Okay, pull 3, 4 drones for that. Attack onto it. All right, very basic response. And the thing is, if you learn to recognize something like this, which relies on being very sneaky, it's not complicated what you have to do in that regard. So we've already talked about that. You'd stop the spines. You'd obviously start building Zerglings as quickly as possible, because if they're building spines in your base, there's a good chance Zerglings are going to come. Now we start to also think about another point, which is a little bit more obscure, which is adjusting your economy when under pressure. And that's something I actually haven't put in my little list over here. So I'm gonna add that as like a point underneath cut workers earlier. I'm gonna write prioritize minerals over gas, usually. Minerals over gas, or basically what you want to do is you want to adjust. I think that's the best way of saying it. Adjust your gas mineral ratio and to the situation. Now, what you want to think about in this situation is you're like, there's spines in my base, there's going to be Zerglings arriving. What should we be focusing on? I think Zergling speed that'll kick in about 3 minutes should really help us. Obviously, you're just like, dude, I just need Zerglings, I just need queens, spines. Basically, I just need mineral things right now. And this is a great rule for whenever you're dealing with early aggression, just making that adjustment, being like, oh, I don't need gas right now, pull off gas. Too many times I see, a Terran player is doing a fast tech build, sees a proxy hatch, and he's like, oh shit. And then he's like, well, I need to put down 2 more barracks to make sure I can defend this. But he just keeps mining from his 2 gas geysers, and there's like this whole like skirmish going on in his base, and he cleans it up pretty well. And then he's looking at like 700 gas in his bank, and he's like, ugh, what the hell do I do with that? Likewise, Zergs just leaving on gas in the middle of the micro. So the earlier you recognize something, it also allows you to make these small little adjustments. Like, hey, I'm going to change my economy just that little bit. I'm going to pull these guys off gas. We can maybe put back on gas once we hold the aggression. All right, so that's a cool one. Now, the final point in this game we're going to get to is we've talked about learning to recognize it, building units earlier. One is cutting workers earlier. So let's think about it. From the moment when we actually saw what was happening, did we cut workers late? So we've seen it. We've seen the spines just at this moment with this overlord popping out. But we didn't build any drones. So what you're looking for there is very small things. And these are actually important things, with building units earlier and cutting workers earlier. Because a lot of the time players will spot what's coming, but it won't quite click in their head. Either they see the units and they don't react and they just stay on autopilot, or they don't notice them on the minimap just through lazy map awareness. In this case, we don't actually do that. So what you want to look for in your games, and this is actually like the really small things you want to look for with defending cheese, is number 1, build units earlier. So the second the spawning pool finishes, did I start Zerglings? And this seems like such a silly thing to look for, but the number of times people don't, there we go, good job. Okay, we did start Zerglings right on time. The number of times people don't start those Zerglings the second that pool finishes because they're distracted. There's lings at my hatchery, they're freaking out. And all of your standard things, all of your standard reactions, standard mechanics often start to just fly out the window. So you've really got to just pay attention to these basic things. A lot of times people lose to a cheesy build and they say like, oh my god, how the hell do I stop that? That's so bullshit. That's imber, man. What could I possibly change? I'm lost. I can't figure out what I would change in that scenario to make this game better. It really comes down to very small things a lot of the time. Oh, you know what? I was too busy microing my drones against the Zerglings in my base, so I started these Zerglings 6 seconds late, which can just lose you a game. When you're dealing with these very aggressive, cheesy attacks, these all-ins, it's always about making sure every second counts. So you really want to be looking at all these small things. And remember, the whole idea of analyzing all these little things, seeing if we can find small things to adjust, is so we don't just kind of throw our arms in the air and say, how the hell could I possibly beat this build? What can I possibly do against it? Looking at this part, we see that the spine crawler is exposed. The drones can't get out to defend it. So we tried to build 2 spines, had to cancel them both. So that brings us to our next point. Well, this is actually one of those more subtle ones where you're thinking to yourself, I need to build spines close, right? Oops. And there we go. So you're thinking to yourself, I need to defend because otherwise these spines are going to root here and they're going to kill my hatchery. So you think I need to build my spines right on the edge so the moment they finish, they're trying to zone out these other spines. Now the reason that's not the correct decision necessarily is something we find out. This is not something you need to know by experience, by being a guy who's played 30,000 games of StarCraft like myself, but we can learn. When you watch this replay, you say, well, if we think about it, this created a choke point with our hatchery, and our drones couldn't get out there to defend. Also, even if we were able to, we'd be awfully close to these spines. So if we like managed to get drones around the top or something and come here, we'd be copping hits from the spine crawlers just trying to defend our own spine. That's really non-ideal. So I would personally say, Xantoha, you know what, next time I go up against this, if I need to put down spines, I'm going to put them like here and here or something. I'm going to put them like well away from their spine crawlers. So if he comes in with lings, I've got plenty of room to fight off those zerglings and micro my drones around so that I'm not blocking the entrance to my mineral line with a spine crawler, because we saw how this not only managed to kill the spine crawler, protect it because the drones couldn't get out, but it also gave the zerglings this great little angle on these drones where the drones couldn't get out. Breaking down those very small micro situations and looking at how to position your buildings differently, how to change the most minute things, that really is where the art of defending cheese efficiently, defending aggression and all-ins efficiently comes from. It's all about, let's go through step by step and go back to that list. So learning to recognize that we saw this game, we really should have seen the drone go missing. We saw that it came into our base and then never left. We should have seen that. Build units earlier. No, we were on top of that. We built units straight away, so that we did a good job with that. The biggest one is always the first one. If you don't recognize it, like that's the biggest. But then there's other things we've seen here as well. And that's like, okay, well, the spine crawler kind of, you got it in the way of our drones, forced us into an awkward fight, made it very hard for us to engage them. And then as we go in here at the end of the game, it's like, well, yes, it is already a little bit, too little too late, so to speak. But imagine if those spines didn't get cancelled. They'd be like finishing up pretty soon. And that would give us a bit of hope. A spine crawler takes 36 seconds to finish. It's now 2 minutes 34 when these spines root. So you want to go back and you want to say, would they have been in time? Now I think they went down at like 2:10. Let's take a look. Okay, so they went down at 2:10. We can also take into account, remember, what if we didn't mine this gas? Remember, if we kept those guys on minerals, we'd have a little bit more as well. So maybe we could have got the spines down even 5-6 seconds earlier. Okay, so you're like, well, if I'm going to build spines, I got to build them ASAP. But what's 36 seconds? Like, this started 7 seconds ago. So if this spine finished, it would be finishing in 29 seconds. Yeah, 29 seconds. So that would be 2:36, 2 minutes 45. So if we fast forward to 2 minutes 45, we see, okay, you know what? Those spines, even if, so we'd have to build it further back to be safe, and it wouldn't even be finished. That's where you start to make an assessment. And you say, you know what? I don't think spines are the answer to this. I just don't think they do a good enough job. And you say, wow, what the hell do I do then? And you've got to feel kind of confused. And then you say, wait a second, always remember, if I just spotted it in the first place, I would have killed the spines while they were building with drones. This would have been easy. But never give up that easily. What if you do end up in a weird situation on a map where he can somehow get the drone into your base without you ever seeing it? What if that happens and you find yourself in this situation? And this is where we think about alternative, creative ways of defending. Never just think about it simplistically. Right now, our entire premise of defending is based around defending this hatchery because it's our base, it's our main base. But there are other options. Namely, we have a hatchery here. Technically, what we could do is ignore the spines, pull all our drones down to the natural, and just set up shop there. And you might think, oh, but then I've sacrificed the hatch, I sacrificed the spawning pool. Do you really? If we look at this game, there's not a lot of zerglings rallying across the map. Yeah, there's 8 more lings in production, but they're quite delayed. It's just 2 spines. If you keep on mining freely from the natural, 2 hatcheries producing a queen popping out, you're going to be able to produce a lot of zerglings, way more than your opponent. Potentially, you could actually just bide your time, and then when the hatchery is about to die from the spines, go in with 15, 16 zerglings, 20 zerglings, and a queen or 2, and maybe you could just hold it, keep both bases up, and then go back to droning. So there's always options that are available to you if you start to think about it. You start out thinking, okay, I want to defend this point where they're attacking. You think about ways you can do that, but whenever it seems like, man, I think it was a bit helpless, I don't think I could, start to think about what can I give up? An aggressive player is always going to be making sacrifices. They're always going to be giving certain things up. And remember, usually because they're really cutting so much economy to make these attacks happen, their whole plan is focused around, I want to hit this point and I want to hit it right there and fight their army, because everything I've done is based around me having more stuff than them. So if they fight me, as soon as they get to their base, I can just overwhelm it before their economy has time to kick in and kill them. Now, what you'll often see at high-level games especially is the defensive player biding their time. They'll only fight in a really sick defensive position. Other than that, they'll dance around. And yeah, that's very advanced. But even without the advanced micro, sometimes they just make that quick judgment call. They're abandon the base, pull drones. Being able to make those calls is not something where the pro gamer has a friggin' calculator in their head saying, I have a it's only a 36% probability of being able to win this fight. And if we lose this fight, I'm pretty sure our overall game chances go down to 6%. It's literally just I've played this situation before. It didn't work out. We watched the replay, and I decided that my best shot in this scenario is I'm going to pull away and fight elsewhere once I've built more units to defend. It's not some magical, intuition. It definitely is just focus on looking at the replays and thinking through different options that they can do to explore to deal with the situation. Now, you can literally go through unlimited possibilities in that regard, and you can always find so many different creative solutions to any all-in. There's so many ways to deal with it, but to keep things simple and to not just sit there theory crafting how to defend different attacks all day, what's the most important way? We've got to remember it's always the first thing that went wrong. So if we go back to the start in this particular replay, it was looking back to, well, we didn't recognize it early on, we didn't scout it. So I think that was pretty good for that game. I think that's most of the points we can get from there. We're going to dive on into the next one now, which is an interesting game as well. This one's going to be from a Terran perspective. I do apologize, guys. I don't have too many replays from other perspectives. I've got a Protoss one next as well. But these are all following a relatively similar pattern in that regard. I didn't get too many submissions of kind of aggressive replays and cheesy replays, but I think we have a good number in order to get some stuff going. So let's dive on into that next game. And this one's going to be a ZBT. So while we put this on the Terran's perspective, we're just going to take a look at our notes, check that the stream's all going well. Okay, so yeah. Okay, cool. So I was making sure we're up to date. We didn't miss any points so far, and we did not. So let's take a look at this replay. And what this replay is all about is chaos. This isn't the most crisp, beautiful timing in this game. What we see here is a Zerg trying to create chaos with us, though. So Inflammez here, and of course this one was submitted by the Zerg, who's gone on a proxy hatch rampage. But Inflammez here says, "Oh, you're blocking my hatch. That's all right. I'm still going to build my command center. I'm going to build a Reaper, queue up some Marines after that. Marines have good damage, and we're going to just start trying to take down this hatch." A lot of players will pull SCVs to deal with that hatchery because they don't want roaches spawning in their base. However, there's lots of different options, and it really is up to you, you know, how you choose to deal with this. If we see in this scenario, as I pointed out earlier, Inflamez is going to really struggle with the pressure that's put on, and we're going to see him start to make a lot of mistakes that he didn't necessarily want to make. He didn't want to make mistakes. Great wisdom there, Jared. Essentially, though, like it's one of these games where I feel like he would have been super mad after this game. I know I would have been. So I think it's a good replay to look at because we kind of... I think the biggest thing we're going to see in this replay is just panic in general. If we just look at the way he's scrolling around, he's doing a good job of kind of ignoring it so far. He's building a bunker here in case units were to pop out of the lava. But he's also being very greedy. So let's talk about a few things. Yes, we're killing this hatchery, but what if 3 roaches were popping out right now? What if... we have no idea what's going on behind this. What if 3 roaches were popping out? They're just going to walk right past the bunker into our mineral line and just start killing SCVs. What if a queen pops out, starts spreading creep, there's more roaches? Straight off the bat, I think Infamous here is kind of just freaked out and going, oh, it's a proxy hatch, and has said to himself, like, let's struggle, let's just try and shut it down with minimal units and continue on our path with our build. And I don't think he's respected the proxy hatch. Now, the reason for this is, early on, he built a second barracks immediately, which I think is a great call. If you think about if someone's ever just pressuring you in your base, trying to go for the throat all in, the first thing you need is basic units with any race, right? Which means more barracks, more gateways, or just simply building Zerglings as a Zerg player, because obviously you've already got your hatchery production down. But as a Terran and Protoss, you build more barracks, you build more gateways, and you just build more basic units. Zealots, Stalkers, Adepts, or just basic Marines. In this case, we built a second barracks, but we haven't really used it. And before we even knew really if he was committing to anything, like if we go back to this point, the hatchery hasn't finished. Let's take a look. And it's like, okay, cool, we can build units. I don't know how that Marine rallied down there. Is there really... I guess that's not enough space for a Marine, just barely, apparently. But he's going straight for a reactor. He doesn't even know if roaches are going to be coming out. A reactor does not help you defend. A reactor takes 36 seconds to build, and then a tech lab as well. There's almost no units coming out. There actually is no units coming out. And there is still threat. Not only that, but we don't have scouting on the other side of the map. So in this particular scenario, we aren't watching broodlings popped out of the hatchery, killed our only fighting units. And then check this. We're like, okay, let's start building some Hellions. Yep, that'll be good. Oh my god, we don't have any fighting units. Okay, we've got some Hellions. Not pulling SCVs to repair. Panicking under these waves of pressure, freaking out amidst it all. The SCVs are too late. The Hellions are being surrounded. SCVs are starting to go down. And our base starts to fall into chaos. Things start to go just all over the place. Oh my god, he built Zerglings at the hatchery, and another drone builds another hatchery? What the hell is this? What is going on? And remember, even though this is not what you'd call your most tight, cheesy, direct attack, it's kind of a series of waves of crazy random stuff the Zerg is throwing in order to try and throw the Terran off. It's doing a damn well good job. Now, let's take a look at how we're responding to this. Cloak. Almost no unit production. We're finally starting up a few Marines, but only after the game gets into a very poor situation. The game from here basically just gets worse and worse. I'll show you guys the rest of the game quickly, and then we'll go back and talk about the many areas where we could have made better decisions. Hatchery in the back finishes up. Zerglings flood in the main again. More Zerglings flooding in. Another hatchery. This game is just absolute chaos. True Zerg, man. Just waves after waves of Zerglings. This game is so funny. And the thing is, we've all been in a game like this, and it's the worst way to lose. It's like the worst way to lose, because you're like, what the hell is this? This is so random. But we've opened the window, we've opened the door. The vampire zerglings can walk in willy-nilly. They don't give a crap, man. And it just goes on and on and on and on, and we never really get our wall open. Essentially, we lose to zerglings A-moving up a narrow ramp for about 10 minutes consecutively, because we never get our wall back up. Okay. Now, like I said, this does feel like the worst way to lose a game. So let's always calm ourselves down after that. Let's go back and say right from the start, step one, let's actually respect the proxy hatch. If there's a proxy hatch in our base, we should respect the ability to build units, right? So straight off the bat, Inflamus should probably say to himself, like, okay, we could build more units. You know what? That's me doing my advanced analysis. We'll save that for a second. Let's think about it just following through the list we were talking about before. Learn to recognize what's happening is the first thing we said. In this scenario, there is no idea what's happening. All we know is there's a hatchery. It could be just a hatchery and macro behind it. In fact, there is macro behind it. Look at this. 2 bases. Quite a lot of drones. He actually goes for a 3rd base as well. So, step 1. We should have sent an SCV scout out. Whenever you're dealing with some weird pressure like this, that could be huge, it could just be non-committal, at all times you want to be trying to scout, right? I actually know players who, rather than bring the Reaper home, would still send the Reaper across the map to scout at the base, saying, you know what, the Reaper's not going to kill the hatchery that fast anyway. I would rather send that Reaper across the map. Now, one of the big reasons the Reaper won't kill the hatchery very fast is it has a point of armor, and the Reaper's attack is split into 2, which means double the armor modifier. He's only doing 6 damage a shot, which is, you know, slightly less than a Marine does. Bunker, that's a good choice. Still going for the command center, saying, I'm not going to let you just completely slow down my build. I like it. But I think definitely having the presence of mind to build an extra few Marines before adding add-ons would have been the perfect thing to do. And most of all, respect the broodlings. Where did things really start to fall apart in this game? It was one very basic, very simple error very early on, which was we didn't respect the broodlings. And this right here is the silliest way to lose a game. But remember, it is often one careless act early on, which leads to everything else falling apart. We now have 0 ranged fighting units. This leads to him pulling his zerglings. We're no doubt already on tilt because we just lost all our fighting units to a bloody hatchery, a building which doesn't attack. There's no ranged building spikes that damage units when they attack it. And here we start to make mistakes. Why didn't we just pull SCVs the moment we saw him attacking those depots? We didn't have that much else to do. What about past this stage? Why aren't we rebuilding that wall? Why aren't we killing those zerglings? We're distracted by zerglings in the back. Oh, chaos. Chaos is what has distracted us in this game. We're building one depot. Why aren't we building the other depot? Why aren't we rebuilding the wall? And this is the story of this game. It's us being constantly distracted and making silly mistakes. So as the Terran player here, we should be saying to ourselves, and look, he even pulls an SCV from further back to build the depot, and he does get it down, but it's too late. It's too late. It's actually barely surviving for the moment, but it's going to be so damaged, and once again, we haven't pulled SCVs to repair. We haven't pulled SCVs to repair this when it finishes building. This has got to be the most cost-inefficient way of breaking a ramp, but we're not repairing. We're worried about a hatchery that's not even doing anything. We pull our entire army away from the front. In come the zerglings, and that just happens over and over again. We've all been in this scenario where a series of crazy random things throw us off our game and we start to flounder and panic. It's important to recognize when this has happened in a game, because often what happens, and I keep talking about going back to the first mistake, the moment where things go wrong. And that's a really good technique whenever you're analyzing any loss in StarCraft. A great thing is to say, you know what, I can look at the last battle where I was down 40 supply, and if I had have landed my fungals just perfectly with corrosive bile, I think I still could have won the game. And it's like, it's cool to have that sort of aspirational focus where you're like, yeah, there's always something to improve even when you're basically dead. But really, if you're looking to improve, what's the most important thing? Where did we start to fall 40 supply behind? Where did we start to get that far back? So you've got to kind of identify in your own head and say, where did I lose control of the game? Or where did things start to not go my way? What really threw me off getting to the point which I should have been at in this game? In this particular scenario, it's where did I flounder? Where did things start to just hit me and I was just not reacting and I was freezing up and panicking? And you want to go back to the very initial things at the start and you want to say, okay, first of all, what went wrong? Well, we didn't really appreciate the command center, the proxy hatchery. We definitely probably should have built a few more Marines. Okay, so that's the first step. The second one, broodlings. Okay, we just lost our first few units to the broodlings. All right. And you know what, you kind of like hate yourself when something like that happens, but you just got to kind of sit there and you literally kind of like have this meditational focus where you're like, next time I am killing a hatchery in my base, I will put my units in the friggin' bunker so they don't get surrounded by the broodlings. And you just like, I will never let this happen again because I am foaming at the mouth with rage at how angry I am that I lost a game because I just stood there with my Marines and Reaper and lost my only ranged damage. And you say, okay, all right, next time if I just build a few more units out of my barracks before putting the add-ons on, make sure I don't get my units killed by the broodlings when the hatchery is dead. Otherwise, I think my response is okay. And you can say that, that's fine. In this particular game, we haven't been punished for it. Like I said, maybe it was like a little bit greedy. You know, we kind of go to like try to get to cloak banshees really fast. Maybe we should have, you know, gone a bit safer. But then you start also to think about, okay, on top of that, in the chaos, we should probably be a little bit better in chaos. And you do want to have a few other points, but they're secondary to the first point. And you say to yourself, well, in future, whenever a depot gets attacked, pull SCVs to repair. Don't freak out. Don't be like, ooh, what's happening? Just grab SCVs, right click on depot. Grab SCVs, right click on the depot. As long as you do that, you know that this game would have worked out very differently. So it's about finding those most important points where everything starts to fall apart. Not looking at it, and we can look in game, and what people will often do is say, yeah, right here. They'll be like, well, I do get my wall back up, so just after this next wave of Zerglings, we'll see it. And they'll say, at this point, if I just kept my army at the ramp, I would have held on. And they usually don't go back far enough in the replay, and they'll identify something like that, and they'll be like, well, if I just left my Hellions and Marines up here, like, we would have been fine, man. And it's like, yeah, you know what would have been more fine? If we didn't lose our units down here. He didn't get a chance to distract us in 2 places and rebuild the hatchery because we were on top of our shit, so he never actually got a chance to do it. And if you can identify something on a basic level like that, suddenly the entire game becomes a lot easier, and it just looks a lot simpler. So in this particular replay, it really was just identifying a few points very early on where we could have shut that cheese down. Also, as we said, we didn't really know what was happening behind it. So what if it was just proxy hatch and then he's just massing roaches on one base and runs up our ramp and tries to kill us? Like, not just from the proxy hatch, but from his main base. He like walks across the map. You kill the proxy hatch, you're like, I'm fine. Maybe your defense wouldn't be in time. Maybe you need to make adjustments as you come across those builds. But I think, as it is, just figuring out those core things that went wrong in this game is really all you need to do. So let's hop into the 4th and final replay, and let's take a look at it. All right. So that replay was Diamond, actually. You can see the replays that Cinder's give me. It's like proxy hatch into proxy hatch. He did a lot of proxy hatch replays. This is another Sindar replay because we get to watch from the Protoss perspective this time. And in this replay, we're going to be looking at... Sorry, you guys couldn't actually see those replay names. Anyway, it was just like proxy hatch into proxy hatch. That one was like, how do you like being on one base, Terran, or something like that. A big thanks for submitting all those replays, mate. So this next replay we're going to be hopping into, it's going to be a little bit of like the Protoss just giving up. And it's kind of the same points we see throughout all these replays. Like at this point, it starts to get repetitive to some extent because we're literally just following that list we talked about at the start. So just before we go into this game, this last game is going to be kind of like a summary of those points. And this is where we are going to, finish up the show in a slightly more timely fashion today. So let's bring those points up on screen one more time. As I said, these are going to be in the YouTube description. There'll be a link to the Team Liquid thread. The notes will all be posted there. If you're watching on Twitch, that'll be posted up tonight. So let me show you guys. Oh. There we go. So what can I change when I lose to aggression? Number one, learn to recognize it. Look for those workers hiding. Look for the early Zerglings coming at X timing. Just memorize those telltale signs. Build units earlier. So we saw in that early Zergling game before, we're like, well, you actually did build your Zerglings straight away, but a lot of the time players don't. In that game just there, we didn't really build a lot of units earlier. Remember, we said we probably could have built some more units out of those barracks. So just build units earlier. Cut workers earlier is something where we always look at like the idea of, can we adjust our gas mineral ratio? Ensuring if we're Zerg, we're not continuing to build drones once we've seen the attack coming. Just little things like that. And the big one is, of course, micro and position differently. So we're always going to look through that whole list. And only if all those points fail do we think back to that first game where we say to ourselves, well, in that first game, if you remember the first game we watched, it was basically just a meching Terran who had no units out at 8 minutes. And like the Zerg just attacked with Roach Ravager and there wasn't a wall and there was no units. And you're like, well, there are some scenarios where you just don't have units because you've messed up your build. There's nothing fancy there and reacting to what your opponent's doing. You simply have way less units than you would most of the time. There's no special reaction here. It's just play better, build more stuff. But right now we're going to be looking at those points. And once again, they are going to answer exactly how to fix this scenario. Most of the time, it's not about a grand change in your build order and saying, I guess I can't get an early Nexus against Zerg. When we hop into this game here, it is all about how the hell can we follow those basic steps. So let's look at it very quickly at first. Probe comes across, sees a drone coming, doesn't try to block the hatch, bit lazy, but that's okay. It's like, all right, hatch, let's check, do you have a third? No, let's go back and... Wow, this is actually so lazy. So yesterday, when I was watching this, I thought that Gluteus checked the main base to see if there was no gas. And that's why he was being so greedy. But apparently Gluteus is just a madman. He's a madman. If he checked, he would have realized this gas was really late and been like, oh, okay, what are you up to? But he didn't. All he's looking for is the third base. And he gets proxy hatched. And this game's over in a flash. Check this out. Once again, we're going to see the kind of ragey BM reaction. I don't know if it was as ragey in this case. He just says like, laugh my ass off or something. And he's just like, lol, what is this shit? This is dumb. Sindar's just like, get wrecked, brother. Get wrecked. Next queen makes some spines. Mothership cannon does nothing. Lings run into the natural and start killing all the probes. All he has is a couple of depths. He's going to start hitting the hatchery. Going to kill some Zerglings with it, but Mothership core is just like getting wrecked by queens. And he just leaves the game. He's like, screw this, man. Let me out of this game. This is bullcrap. This is unfair. Let's go back. And I mean, I really just want to break it down using knowledge. But first of all, let's think back to, from Gluteus's point of view, not from me as a pro, as someone who's played thousands of games of StarCraft's point of view. Let's just apply the list. So let's go back to early on. And let's say, well, first of all, we did point out with recognizing it. Well, we didn't check the gas. That's just a general lazy point. But exact same thing as we saw in that spine game. Whenever you see an enemy worker go missing in your base, you should really be thinking to yourself, That's a little bit sus. Oh, that drone just really wants to scout my cliff. Maybe he's having a picnic over here and eating some friggin' roast pork or something. I don't know what's going on. It's fine. I bet he's just chilling. And this is really like, it's such a basic thing. But you should notice whenever a worker's in your base. This is very simple, very obvious. There's no way this was hidden. It walked right past us. And yet we don't notice it. Straight off the bat, we say, number one, how to recognize it. Actually pay attention to workers in your base. Number two, if this probe did go into the main base, that would have verified 100%. Imagine this hatchery was hidden in a nice fancy position up here or something, or here. Somewhere where you're not actually going to get any vision of the drone going into your base. Well, even then, the scouting probe walked past it. If he saw the drone walking past, he's like, hey man, you just walked past my probe. And then the drone doesn't arrive. Immediately the Protoss player should know. So what we're starting to develop here is an idea of, in the early game, you should always have a small portion of your brain dedicated to thinking, where is their worker? The moment you see a worker, that part of your brain activates and you say, where is it? And if it shows up and just walks around your base checking out your gas timings and everything, you're like, that's a normal worker scout. And if it's not, you're like, shit man, that's something I've got to deal with. Also, we could have checked the main, because this was a 3 hatchery, so it was hatch first into proxy hatch. It was a 3 hatchery before pool. So simply seeing the lack of a third, if we went back into the main base here as Gluteus, we would see, oh, there's no gas and no spawning pool. That would tell you there's a hidden hatchery somewhere. And if it's not there, where else would it be? What, is he taking a 4th base? Maybe. But it's also going to give you a reason to scout around. So even if the hatchery was somehow hidden, we didn't see the drone coming across the map, we didn't see anything that made us check for a hidden hatchery up here, simply scouting the main base and the 3rd base through the lack of that 3rd, through the lack of a normal time spawning pool and gas, would tell us that. Now, if you're a more amateur player, or sorry, a more beginner player, you're not as experienced, you might be like, well, how do you tell the difference, man? It's very obvious. You don't need to know exact timings, but normally if a Zerg gets a hatchery and goes a pool and a gas, their pool and their gas will both be finished at the same time the hatchery finishes. So you can easily just compare. You can be like, well, the hatchery is almost finished. Let's check in here. The spawning pool's just started. That's the 3 hatchery before pool build. The spawning pool otherwise would be finishing at the same time as the hatchery. Very basic. You can always learn these little rules of kind of comparing things, or you can remember the game timer at which things happen. Okay, so we've talked about number one, recognizing it. Now, how could we deal with this? Attack it with probes. You could pull like 7 probes and just attack that, and by the time it finishes building, it would pretty much be dead. And you'd be, oh, isn't that a lot of lost mining time? Yeah, but it's a hatchery he's built in your base, so it costs him a lot as well. And then you can just go back to mining, and it works out pretty even. What's another adjustment we can make? Well, we can say, look, in this scenario, we talked about economy, knowing when to cut probes. So the moment we spot that, we can also cut probes. We can say, oh, probes aren't important. Let's just get another gateway down straight away, which we already actually had. And we can just chrono boost out zealots. Zealots or stalkers are really good units against this, right? Zealots especially, because they just deal so much damage so quickly. So you can say, just build those basic units. Same as the Terran player dealing with the proxy hatch, just get a bunch of extra Marines out, get some Zealots out, cut some workers. We can also say to ourselves, well, if that's our priority, we're really just trying to stay alive. We don't need the gas, right? We don't need the second gas mining. So there's no reason to put guys on that. All we need is to focus on our minerals. So we can start to make an economic adjustment. Now, past all that, let's imagine somehow we don't see it. We end up in the chaos position. I think this is still a good exercise to always think of what could I do if the situation gets really bad, if we don't get the information. We just make that mistake, we're half asleep. So at this point, Gluteus realizes. And he's like, okay, let's chrono boost some adepts. He's realized, he's seen the creep. So at this point, you can say, what could Gluteus have done better? Well, first of all, Mothership Core. We could chrono boost out the Mothership Core straight away. We've got the money, or 20 minerals away anyway. But we're building a probe. Come on, man. Where's the Mothership Core? That's so important. Gonna build a pylon, and then a Mothership Core. Okay. Says laugh my ass off, and then gets killed by spines, because he's too busy laughing, rather than actually paying attention to what he should be fighting. Now, what are adepts good against? Light units. What are they bad against? Buildings. What are they bad against? Big old biological, psionic, massive hit point queens. They're not necessarily bad against them, they just don't kill them very fast. If we look at this, he's building spines literally next to our probe line. This is one of those situations where it is so easy to say to yourself, in hindsight, if you watch this replay, you don't need much advanced knowledge to say, why didn't we just grab our probes and A-move them and kill the spines while they were building? Super easy hold. Also, why did we build adepts? Why didn't we build zealots? They're going to dish out way more damage than adepts. So already, we can say to ourselves, the next time we're in this situation, we've built a trigger.
Hello.
Hey guys, look, a girl.
Distracting from Snowcraft.
Yeah, King Kong's snoring is pretty great. Thanks. Okay. Hey.
Bye.
So almost lost my track of thought. See you, babe. What are we going to focus on? We're talking about building a list in your head. So once you get into these chaotic situations, if you can just focus on a few very small things and doing them instantly, because it's like I said, whenever you're in these hard positions, it's always about reacting like bam, the click of your fingers so damn fast. So in this situation, we can say to ourselves, okay, the next time we spot a proxy hatch in our base, we're surprised by it. The moment we see it, number 1, build zealots, number 2, pull probes. If they're not building spines, maybe there's no point attacking the hatchery because it's already finished building and stuff with probes. Maybe that's not worthwhile. But you got to stop the spines getting up, right? If a roach pops out like 1 or 2 at a time, that's something you can deal with. But if he gets 3 spine crawls up in our base, that's not something we can deal with. So you say, okay, next time, focus on zealots at first, not adepts. Number 2, pull probes. Number 3, build mothership core. And you say, okay. And because you commit that to your memory, the next time you see a proxy hatch, you have like a trigger. And it's a trigger in your brain where you go, bam! You step your foot on the gas, you go instantly, 2 zealots, mothership core, pull probes, A move. And you do that in the space of a second, 2 seconds. And that is the difference between a player who improves at StarCraft and a player who doesn't, is building those triggers. It's not about necessarily being a programmer. I've seen players in gold, sometimes platinum, with like the sickest reactions to things because they've dealt with it before and they've understood it and they've said, you know what? I know what to do next time. And this has happened with players I've coaching, friends, and like they will have the sickest micro. I was playing with a friend once and he'd struggled with early pools. And I showed him how to do like mineral micro with his drones. And I've never seen someone at that level do like the most perfect drone micro, instantly surrounding a pack of Zerglings and just shutting down an early pool. Overall, it's not like he had crazy APM or mechanics or he'd played thousands and thousands of games, but he'd actually got so frustrated because he'd died to it a few times. He'd figured out a response. Luckily, he'd had my help as well. And then he just crushed it the next time he played against it. In this same scenario, if we just build zealots, pull probes, build mothership core, we can shut down this pressure so damn quickly. So in this scenario, the adepts just don't really do much. They attack the queen. They probably should be focusing on the spines, not letting those get up. Spines, all structures when they're building don't have that point of armor yet. Once they finish, they do. And in the case of spines, they actually get 2 points of armor because spines are imber. And that's actually very powerful. Of course, that 2 points of armor makes them much stronger against zealots, but zealots still just dish out so much damage that even with the double armor modifier, they still actually do a pretty decent amount. But yeah, from here, I mean, the pylon cannon doesn't do anything. It just hits a hatchery. The adepts aren't really doing anything. These next units were really slow to start. Now, why were they so slow to start? Well, why didn't we cancel the Twilight Council? You know, there's little things that went on there. Why are we out of 62 as well? So we can also talk about adjusting our build order. So the final point here, and the thing is, I said you only need to go back and change your build order if everything else doesn't work. And in this case, Gluteus had like 17 different opportunities to both spot this and shut this down. But in terms of his build order, it still is a situation where as an experienced player, so this is me just lending my own experience, I looked at this and I was like, why the hell don't you have any units almost 3 minutes into a game, especially against a player who doesn't have a third, but really against anyone? Ling speed could be kicking in at like 3 minutes 30. You don't have a mothership core. You don't have a wall. You've got... This is actually very bad pylon placement as well. So definitely something where Gluteus needs to work on his gateway placement, in my opinion. Oh, maybe that's not the worst. But why not just take the rocks down as well? Why not have just built a single early zealot and taken the rocks down? I don't know. It's obviously up to him what decisions he wants to make as a player. But not having a mothership core or any fighting units at this point in the game just really like made me go like, oh, you need to have units, man. What if some Zerglings walk across the map? And he definitely did make it harder for himself to respond to this sort of thing. If his mothership core was out, he had enough energy for 2 or 3 overcharges. This becomes a much easier scenario. And it becomes an easier hold. So guys, I think that's going to be the last replay we look at today. I did forget to say, but please shout out questions at x5_pig. Use that tag. Shout them out. We'll quickly answer a few questions, and then we will round up today's show. And it's still about an hour long. We're trying to get the show less. What we're going to do tomorrow and onwards, or maybe not tomorrow, but because tomorrow is our show match day. But as much as possible going forwards, we're going to start adding a little 1 or 2 minute intermission in the middle of the show. That way I can break it into 2 videos very easily. And it'll break it up for people who watch on YouTube, as a lot of people have requested that. All right. So, the Twilight Cancel. Council the Twilight Cancel. Did I say that? That's actually hilarious if I did. Yeah, we're going to be doing some show matches, guys. So for people in the chat asking, basically we get players. It's not really a show match. It's more like... it's actually a really great suggestion that someone made on Team Liquid on the thread, where they said, what would be a cool idea is to get 2 pros, get them to play a match. We hop out after the match. The loser analyzes why they lost. We find that key bad decision they made, and we do a recover game from just before that key bad decision. And then we play it out again. We see what changes. We see how the other player adjusts as well to the new situation. And at the end of it, the 3 of us sit down, I ask them questions, and we generally just have a little discussion about the game, the meta in that matchup, what both players could have done differently, where their mistakes were, and hopefully that'll just give you guys the perspective of the current best foreign players. So I'm just waiting for 100% confirmation, but that should be on tomorrow morning. We will be starting at half an hour earlier than the show normally starts as well, so that it's at a friendly time for our European pro gamers. All right, so we've got some questions coming in now. Mitt Hurdler says, Pig, is it better to pull probes to kill a proxy hatch or prepare to kill it when it finishes? It's usually better to kill it with probes. That's the way to make the situation cleaner and easier. If you've got a forge, you can maybe just put down 2 photon cannons next to it, and that'll kind of get the job done. But pulling probes is usually what's favored. You know what? I don't have a lot of experience playing against proxy hatches as Protoss, so I look forward to learning more about it. So I'm by no means a resource on that. Even when I did proxy hatch builds quite a lot against Protoss, that was in HOTS, and it was always proxy hatching either the natural or, kind of spine rushing up into the main base. So it's always been quite a different situation. But my intuition and from past experience, it tells me that just pulling probes and killing it, as long as you spot it early enough, is always going to be good. Like if you spot it the moment it starts, you can just pull like 10 probes and just like force them to cancel it straight away. And that starts costing them more and more money if they've got to keep canceling and rebuilding. Especially if you can just surround the drone, like kill it immediately after the hatchery goes down, then it's going to make things very difficult for them. CrySC says, Pig, what's the best way to defend cannon rushes in your opinion? Totally depends on the matchup. Usually it's just a combination of pulling workers and blocking the key locations. Now in PvP, something I learned recently on ladder is if they try to cannon behind your mineral line, as long as you've got proper pylon positioning, you can just overcharging, and like an overcharge will kill 2 photon cannons, or almost kill 2 photon cannons. With the mothership core damage as well, you'll easily kill 2 photon cannons with that. So unless they've managed to wall in like 6 cannons where your probes can't reach them, usually you're fine with overcharge. Generally though, it's a mixture of pulling workers and just fighting with basic units. I did run in on my my Terran account. I think it was my first day of playing Terran. As a Zerg, I've got so much experience dealing with cannon rushes. I played a guy who was, I think, top master, just using cannon rushes, and we just pulled workers, built Marines, built a second barracks, and started queuing Marines out of that straight away, and we just kind of overwhelmed it very early on. Tried to focus down the probes. We blocked key spots. Obviously, key spots are wherever they can wall in and limit your surface area. So whenever we'd see where he'd put a pylon down, we'd immediately figure out where the key cannon spots were, and we'd sometimes just leave like a single SCV patrolling on that spot while the other ones were actually doing the fighting. Now, Insane Hate says, Pig, you mentioned adjusting your economy by pulling off gas. But in Zerg vs. Zerg, Bayness needs gas, right? Isn't that a really good defensive idea for early Zerg aggression? Now, that's a great question from Insane Hate. This is something I talk about a lot, is when you're defending an early attack, choosing, in Zerg vs. Zerg especially, choosing your route. So do you invest in the gas or do you invest in the minerals? Now, ideally, you'd always have Zergling speed and a Baneling Nest, right? Because that gives you the mobility. It gives you the ability to put pressure back on your opponent. That's amazing. That's fantastic. What's the problem? It takes a long time to kick in. Now, you need to make the call based on the situation, what you're dealing with, to adjust to the scenario, how early you scout what's coming. So if it's a situation where they're doing a 12 pool on Arena and you're doing a hatch gas pool, and you're just like, oh, it's fine, I'll just wait for Zergling speed and my Baneling Nest to finish. Your Baneling Nest will finish. You'll have one drone and no other units left alive by then, though. Like, you just won't have anything left because it won't kick in time. So you always need to make the judgment, will your gas kick in time to actually be helpful against the attack? So with the very fastest cheeses, it's almost never worthwhile. That's why almost always you'll see me just pull guys off gas in Zerg vs. Zerg if I see an early pull. Just defend with drones, queens, lings, build spines. And by pulling drones as well, because I've got more minerals, I can afford to lose a few more drones, but I can also afford to always protect my hatchery at the natural. And then I've got 2 bases versus 1, and I'm always able to macro out of that, at least on a relatively even footing, as long as I micro well. Now, eNorm says, Pig, please emphasize guild orders. Sorry, this is not guild wars, but I think you mean build orders. In terms of build orders, that's great. We are going to be doing some more shows talking about build orders. The thing is, what we're talking about more is concepts, because this is something I want people to be applying and thinking about the game critically. As much as I love build orders, what I want people to be looking at is the scenarios through their own understanding. And I know from experience that 95% of the StarCraft player base, or maybe 90%, at least 90%, aren't really thinking about the build orders in terms of type terms while they're playing. They're not spotting a proxy hatch at X timing and saying, this is a third proxy hatch timing, which means he's potentially going for 3 roaches, which will pop out in 45 seconds. People aren't going through those timings. So when people ask me for build orders, I do feel like what they're looking for is an easy answer to trying to win games without understanding what's going on behind it. And as much as I like to give people build orders and we do overviews of how pro players do their certain openings, and whenever we talk about a pro game, we go through that replay, we show the opening build order, we do that, and sometimes even past the opening. But that's not really what the Pig Daily is about. The Pig Daily is about trying to get players to understand what's going on and make decisions for themselves. Because ultimately you can follow a build order and it can work great. And then the metagame can shift, and 2 weeks later, your build is worthless because you don't understand what's happening inside the build order enough. So instead of looking at just the exact build orders, I think what we really want to be focusing on is more of these concepts. I definitely will be bringing it back, looking at build order examples. We'll be revisiting this topic a lot. We'll be looking at defending all-ins. We can say, look, today we're looking at, in PvP, defending all-in blink attacks or all-in attacks. We're going to be doing this show for a long time, so we're going to be coming back and revisiting topics in more specifics, looking at more build orders, but that's going to be much more matchup focused. Today was a general show talking about the concepts, and it was also meant to be very applicable and kind of available for all the newer players, all the players who haven't played 20,000 games, non-stop since Wings of Liberty. So I hope you can forgive me for not having quite as many build orders today, but it should be good. One last question. Schmifflepuff says, Pig, do you think it's important to learn timings or just develop good logic and intuition for what you scout? I think both are really good. I think learning good timings and learning solid build orders can be fantastic. It can really help you improve, but at the same time, you sometimes just want to explore your own way, completely your own way. Figure things out intuitively. Intuitively, I can speak. So basically, you just want to kind of go at it from both angles. If you can kind of maybe say, look, I want to get a solid build to start out, so I'm just going to copy this first few minutes of opening from this pro player. But then you start to make it your own. As you deal with things which kill you, don't just then choose a different build order. Make those small adjustments. Start to learn intuitively, using logic, thinking about the game. And as long as you use logic, critical thinking, you're always gonna just learn the game so much faster. And as you learn to understand those things, the next time you go to copy a pro's build order, you're actually gonna understand more parts of it, and you're gonna notice that they're reacting to certain things within the execution that you're watching. So I think that's about now for today, guys. I think today's episode was quite an interesting topic. I enjoyed it. That's my teammate King Kong. He's sleeping just here. So a big thanks to him for putting up with me sitting here, kind of talking and shouting while he's chilling. He's down here in Sydney doing some visa stuff. So that's all cool. So thanks for hanging out, guys. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, whatever. Follow the channel if you're on Twitch. Tomorrow, actually, yeah, today's Wednesday. That means tomorrow. Yep. So I know it's the day before where you guys are for the most part, but yeah, we're going to be doing a little special show tomorrow, a bit of a show match. I have the players pretty much locked down, but keep an eye on Team Liquid, and we'll have that up there. So yeah, thanks for hanging out, guys. I think today's show was pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how this one went, but we better just round up now. So thanks for hanging out. Don't forget to hug a cactus, lick a watermelon, and of course punch a penguin in the cankle. That's all for now, guys. Goodbye and good night.